Basements often get a bad rap. They are the safe haven for many in a storm, a root cellar, or sometimes just a hangout spot. However, there is definitely something chilling about being in a room surrounded by earth. There are often the scenes set for all kinds of scary stories. Unfortunately, not all of the horror stories told about basements are fiction. In this episode of Scary TV, we have 3 horrifying basement stories that are sure to make you never set foot in the underground of any home again. Before we dive in, ring that bell so you can stay up to date on all things Scary TV. The year was 1978. Joseph Fritzl applied for a permit to expand the basement of his home. He was an electrical engineer and the type of man that took care of things at his home. He was well known around the small Austrian village of Amstetten. This was his birthplace, and he stayed in the area in raising his family. Joseph married a local girl named Rosemary, and they had 7 children. The village was a close-knit community, and people were well aware of Joseph's ironclad hold on his family. Most of the community attributed to Joseph being a strict parent. There were not many people close to the family, so no one knew how Joseph really was. Joseph went well beyond strict parenting. He would yell and beat his children for the smallest displays of childlike behavior. Rosemary also treated in the same abusive manner. Joseph controlled every aspect of her life, and she was not allowed access to any of the money and did not have any friends. Rosemary was expected to give Joseph complete obedience, and if she did not comply, the beatings were severe. Joseph seemed to take a cruel interest in his 4th child, Elizabeth. She seemed to be the one that Joseph beat the most severely. He controlled every aspect of her life. She was not allowed to have any outside interaction, and Joseph took Elizabeth everywhere he went. He forced her to keep a diary and then would allow him to read it. This is where it gets a little graphic, though, so take a second to turn down the volume around any minors. When Elizabeth turned 11, the abuse turned sexual. Joseph began to expose himself to his daughter. He took particular joy in leaving pornographic magazines next to her pillow. When Elizabeth turned 12, he began to rape her. Due to Elizabeth's isolated life, she had no one to turn to. The few school acquaintances she did have knew that her home life was bad, but never knew how horrifying it really was. At this time, Joseph continued his work on expanding his basement. He told others that the underground room would be used as a bomb shelter. The project had become a labyrinth of tiny rooms connected by dark, narrow passages. No one in the community questioned the need for a bomb shelter. This was the 70s or 80s, and the Cold War was still on. Many Austrians still remembered a time in their past that bombs had fallen from the sky. In fact, Joseph himself had only been 3 when bombs fell and Hitler's armies marched through this village. Joseph had become obsessed with Hitler, even though his own father had been arrested and sent to a concentration camp for years. The mother that returned to Joseph after the time in the concentration camp was not the same woman that left. She was neglectful, leaving Joseph alone for days at a time. She beat her son, and when the village was bombed again, Joseph went alone to the air raid shelters. So no one questioned the desire Joseph had to build his bomb shelter. He did most of the work himself. Joseph began referring to the underground rooms as his kingdom. If others had been allowed in the room, they may have noticed aspects of the bomb shelters that didn't make any sense. For example, the door to the bomb shelters was hidden behind rotating shelves. The inner door could only be opened with an electrical code that, of course, only Joseph knew. The strangest thing about the door was that it could only be locked from the outside. In early 1983, Elizabeth was 16, and the basement bunker was near completion. It was that year that Elizabeth made an attempt to escape her monster of a father. She ran away to Vienna. Joseph reported her as a runaway when she was quickly found. The Vienna police called Joseph and told him to pick up his daughter. That day, Joseph told Elizabeth that she would never be free from him again. When Elizabeth turned 18, she told her father that she had found a job and that she was moving to the next town over to live with her older sister. Sharing this information was a mistake. On August 28, 1984, Joseph asked Elizabeth to help him with a door in the underground chamber. She then entered the room where her father drugged her and handcuffed her into the depths of the basement's labyrinth. He then went to the police and said that his daughter had once again run away. But even Elizabeth's history of running away was not enough to stop the police from investigating the situation. This led them to look into Joseph's past, and what they found was disturbing. In the early days of his marriage to Rosemary, Joseph would stay up late so that he could look through the open windows in hopes of seeing couples in a state of intimacy. He had also exposed himself to women on the street. Joseph had served a year in jail for a rape. Ever the obedient wife Rosemary told no one, though. It had been 15 years, and the rape conviction was no longer a part of Joseph's record. Joseph's disturbing past caused the police to grow even more suspicious, so Joseph went into the basement and forced Elizabeth to write a letter saying that she had joined a cult. He then drove over 100 miles away just to mail the letter. The missing person case then closed, but Elizabeth's life of terror was just beginning. Elizabeth lived her life chained to the wall of the basement. The only time she was unchained is when her father would come down to the room to rape and torture her. In 1988, Elizabeth was pregnant with her father's child. Joseph gave her a book, scissors, and a towel and forced her to give birth alone in the basement. Elizabeth gave birth to her first child, a girl named Kirsten. Elizabeth gave birth again to a son, Stephen, soon followed by a girl named Lisa. The third child was born with a physical condition that caused constant crying. Elizabeth pleaded with her father to take the child to the hospital. He devised a plan to leave the child in a box at the front door with a note from Elizabeth saying she had given birth and could not raise a child in the cult. Joseph and Rosemary adopted Lisa. 2 years later, Elizabeth gave birth to another girl, a girl named Monica. Joseph devised the same scheme to adopt this child as well. Joseph decided the basement needed more room for Elizabeth and the 3 children he left in the bunker with her. He made them dig with their bare hands. Eventually, the basement room was expanded to 590 square feet. In 1996, Elizabeth gave birth to twins, one of which was born with a respiratory disease and died. Joseph burned the baby in the furnace. As for the other twin, a boy named Alexander, he wanted to adopt him and proceeded to make Elizabeth write another letter. In 2002, Elizabeth gave birth to her 7th child. Joseph continued raping and torturing Elizabeth, this time in constant view of the children. Joseph also enjoyed mocking the family he kept living in the small, windowless basement by bringing pictures of the adopted children living a life above ground. Kirsten, the oldest of Elizabeth's children, was now 19 and began to show physical signs of her life in the dungeon. She began to have seizures and eventually lost consciousness. Elizabeth pleaded with her father to not let her die. Joseph brought his granddaughter to the hospital. The hospital staff questioned Joseph about Kirsten's emaciated and filthy condition. Joseph began angry and refused to answer. Joseph's behavior, combined with the absence of any records, raised alarms to the hospital staff. Kirsten slipped into a coma, and the staff began to search for Elizabeth in hope of getting answers about Kirsten's condition. Down in the basement, Elizabeth begged Joseph to let her go see her daughter. She promised she would not tell anyone of her life of horror. On April 26, 2008, after 24 years of captivity, Joseph allowed Elizabeth to leave the basement. Police questioned Elizabeth, suspecting her of abusing and neglecting Kirsten. After hours of questioning, Elizabeth finally told her tale of 24 years of abuse, torture, and captivity in her father's basement of horror. Joseph was arrested that day and will be eligible for parole in 2024. Elizabeth is said to be with her children out of the spotlight of the public and out of that basement. If you are struggling with domestic violence or abuse, please safely seek help. Elizabeth's life of horror is not the only tale that many abused victims tell, and some don't live to tell it. Not all basement stories of terror involve the captivity of humans. Joshua Singwin, who was driving his pickup truck in upstate New York, just an ordinary man out working, except when police officers pulled over Joshua, they discovered he was transporting 5 live sharks in the back of his pickup. This was the cause of the arrest. Marine biologists and police decided to investigate the man's home. The upstairs of the home looked like any other bachelor pad, nothing to see there, but soon the investigation led to the basement. Inside of the basement was an above-ground pool with 7 live sharks in it. They were identified as sandbar sharks, and those are illegal to possess. Law enforcement also found 2 leopard sharks, 1 dead hammerhead shark, and a snout of a small-toothed sawfish, a critically endangered species. Joshua was no ordinary businessman, though. He dealt in illegal captivity and selling of sharks. The remaining sharks are now residents of the New York's aquarium, while Joshua is a resident of the New York prison. Talk about straight out of an Austin Powers movie. Comment below if you like to have sharks in your basement. When you buy a building that has been vacant for a long time, you expect to find some dust, maybe some creepy crawlies in the basement. What you don't expect to find is mummified remains of 2 children. In 2010, 2 women who were cleaning a basement of the Los Angeles building they had recently purchased. In one of the large basements, they found a trunk. Inside of the trunk, wrapped in LA Times newspapers dating back to the 1930s, were the mummified remains of 2 newborn infants. They were sealed inside of the trunk with various Peter Pan-related paraphernalia, including a copy of the book and a membership card to the Peter Pan Woodland Club. Oddly enough, the initials on the trunk were J.M. Barrie. The name of the membership card was Janet M. Barrie, the same initials of the author of Peter Pan. While some theorized the owner of the trunk could be a distant relative of the famous author, it was later revealed there was no relation. Furthermore, DNA tests were able to reveal the infants were the children of Janet M. Barrie, a Scottish immigrant. They were most likely illegitimate children, and while the identity of the owner of the trunk was unearthed, this did not shed any light on the circumstances that led to the infant's death. It will be forever a mystery on what happened to these 2 sweet children. Can you keep these 3 horrifying basement stories out of your mind the next time you are walking down the stairs to the underground? Do you prefer the paranormal or the folklore over this? Or would you like us to do more true crime videos that have horrific tales? Comment below to let us know. If this video gets 100 likes, we'll make a follow-up video with 3 more true crime basement horror stories. This is Scary TV, signing out.